When people decide to learn English, the first thing they often do is look for methods, materials, and shortcuts. They download apps, buy books, and watch videos about grammar rules and pronunciation techniques. They focus on the what and the how. What to study, how long it will take. But very few take the time to stop and ask the most powerful question of all, why do I want to learn English? That question changes everything. It's not just a word, it's the foundation that determines how fast, how deeply, and how passionately you will learn. Your why is your fuel. It's the emotional energy that keeps you moving when learning feels frustrating or slow. Without it, motivation fades. You may start strong, but when progress doesn't come as fast as you hoped, you'll stop. However, when your why is strong, you push through confusion, mistakes, and self-doubt. You no longer ask, can I learn English? You start asking, how can I learn it better? That mindset shift changes the way you approach every single day of practice. Think about why English matters to you personally. Maybe you want to study abroad and understand lectures without translation. Maybe you want to communicate with international clients or travel freely without fear of misunderstanding. Maybe you simply want to connect with people from all around the world and share your ideas confidently. Whatever your reason is, it has to be something that moves you emotionally, something that gives you a sense of purpose every time you open your notebook or turn on a video lesson. When you have a powerful reason, your brain becomes more focused. Learning stops being a duty and starts being a mission. You begin to see English not as a subject you have to memorize, but as a tool that brings you closer to the life you want. Suddenly, every word, every phrase, every sentence you learn feels meaningful. You stop thinking, I have to study English. Instead, you start thinking, I get to learn a language that connects me to the world. That change in attitude accelerates learning more than any textbook ever could. People who learn English quickly don't necessarily have more talent or intelligence. What they have is clarity of purpose. They know exactly why they're doing it, and that gives them focus. They wake up earlier to listen to English podcasts. They use their breaks to read articles. They talk to strangers online even when it feels uncomfortable. They do all this not because someone told them to, but because their why is alive inside them, constantly reminding them of what's possible. Without a why, learning feels heavy. You'll study for a few days, then skip one, then two, until the habit disappears. You'll start blaming yourself for being lazy or untalented, but it's not laziness, it's lack of purpose. When your reason isn't clear, your brain doesn't know what it's working for. It doesn't see the reward behind the effort. That's why people give up, not because English is hard, but because they lose sight of why they started in the first place. Your why should also be personal and emotional. Because I want a better job is a reason, but it's not always powerful enough. Dig deeper. Why do you want that job? Maybe it's because you want to give your family security. Maybe it's because you want to prove to yourself that you're capable of achieving more than you ever imagined. The deeper the reason, the stronger your drive. When your why touches your heart, discipline comes naturally. A strong why also helps you overcome fear. The fear of speaking, of making mistakes, of sounding silly. When you remember why, your learning embarrassment fades. You stop caring about what others think because your purpose is bigger than their opinions. You become unstoppable. Every conversation becomes a step forward. Every error a lesson. Every small success a sign that you're moving closer to your goal. This is why great learners are not motivated by perfection, but by passion. Their energy doesn't come from pressure. It comes from belief. They see English not as something foreign, but as something that already belongs to them. They just need to claim it. And that belief starts with knowing exactly why they want it. So before you start your next English lesson, take a moment to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Write it down. Read it every morning. Let it remind you that this journey isn't just about words or grammar. It's about growth, connection, and transformation. When your why becomes clear, learning stops feeling like a challenge. It becomes a calling. Immersion is the secret ingredient that turns slow learners into fluent speakers. It's not about spending more hours memorizing lists or rules. It's about surrounding yourself so completely with English that it becomes a natural part of your daily life. When you immerse yourself, English stops being a subject you study and starts being a world you live in. The goal isn't to force learning. It's to create an environment where learning happens almost automatically, just like breathing. Imagine waking up in the morning and the first thing you hear is an English podcast or song. You go about your routine listening to the rhythm of the language, hearing how words connect, how sentences flow, how emotions are expressed. Even before you formally sit down to study, your brain is already absorbing. You're learning pronunciation, tone, and natural expressions without effort. This is the magic of immersion. It teaches you subconsciously while your conscious mind is simply living. The reason immersion works so well is that it mimics the way we learned our first language. As children, we didn't study grammar rules or memorize vocabulary lists. We lived inside the language. Every sound, every word, every sentence came from what we heard daily. Over time, our brain picked up the patterns naturally. The same process can happen with English if you let it surround you completely. The more your mind hears and sees English, the faster it starts connecting meaning to sound, thought to expression. Immersion doesn't always require traveling to an English-speaking country. It can happen right where you are. Change the language on your phone to English. Follow English-speaking influencers on social media. Watch movies and shows without subtitles or with English subtitles if you need support. Read articles, blogs, and short stories. The goal is to make English the language your eyes and ears encounter most often. Every small exposure adds up and trains your mind to process English as something familiar, not foreign. When you live in English, you begin to notice its rhythm. You start to understand how native speakers emphasize certain words, how they express emotions, how they use humor, and how tone changes meaning. This kind of understanding doesn't come from textbooks. It comes from constant contact. You begin to feel the language, not just study it. That feeling is what turns learners into speakers who sound confident and natural. Immersion also changes the way you think. At first, you may still translate everything back to your native language, but after enough exposure, you start thinking directly in English. That's when real progress happens. You stop hesitating before speaking. You stop mentally translating. Your brain starts forming ideas in English from the very beginning. It's not something you consciously decide. It's something that naturally develops from daily exposure. The key to successful immersion is consistency. It's not about how much time you spend at once, but how often you engage with the language. 10 minutes of English every day is better than 3 hours once a week. Immersion is a lifestyle, not a study plan. You're not forcing your brain to learn. You're feeding it the language regularly until it becomes part of your identity. You begin to see yourself not as someone who learning English, but as someone who way lives in English. One of the best ways to deepen immersion is through interaction. Don't just listen or read, respond. Join online communities, speak with friends, comment on videos, or even talk to yourself. Every time you use the language, you reinforce what you've been absorbing. Passive exposure teaches you how English sounds, but active use teaches you how to make it your own. Both are essential, and together they create a powerful loop of learning and confidence. Immersion also transforms your mindset. Instead of thinking of English as something outside of you, you begin to see it as part of who you are becoming. You develop curiosity instead of fear. When you hear a new phrase, you don't feel confused. You feel excited to learn it. You start to notice how much English is everywhere in songs, in movies, in signs, in conversations. It becomes impossible not to learn because you've built a world where English lives all around you. Every small choice, the music you play, the articles you read, the conversations you start builds your English world. You don't have to study harder, you just have to live in it longer each day. The moment you stop treating English as a school subject and start treating it as an environment, you move from memorizing to mastering. Immersion makes English your companion, not your challenge, and that shift changes everything about the way you learn. One of the biggest mistakes people make when learning English is waiting until they feel ready to speak. They tell themselves they'll start talking after they've memorized enough words, after they've perfected their pronunciation, or after they've finished another grammar course. But that day never truly comes, because perfection never arrives. The fastest learners understand a simple truth. Fluency is not the result of perfect grammar, it's the result of fearless speaking. You learn faster when you speak first and correct later. Speaking is not just an outcome of learning, it's part of the learning process itself. When you speak, You activate what you've learned, you test vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation in real situations. You make mistakes, yes, but each mistake teaches your brain what works and what doesn't. Every time you open your mouth, you're strengthening neural connections that make future communication easier. The more you speak, the more natural the process becomes, and the faster fluency grows. Many learners hesitate because they're afraid of being judged or sounding foolish. They compare themselves to native speakers or more advanced learners and think they're not good enough to participate. But the truth is, everyone starts somewhere. Even the most fluent speakers once struggled to form basic sentences. The courage to speak before you're perfect separates those who improve quickly from those who stay stuck. You can't build confidence by waiting for it. You build it by using your voice again and again. Think of speaking like learning to ride a bicycle. You don't read a book about balance and then ride perfectly on your first try. You wobble, you fall, you try again. Each attempt teaches your body how to adjust. Language works the same way. Your brain learns through repetition, through trial and error, through trying even when it's uncomfortable. The faster you get on the bike of speaking, the faster you'll find your balance. When you speak without fear, you start discovering your natural rhythm and tone. You learn to think on your feet, to find words quickly, to express ideas without freezing. These are skills that only speaking can teach. Reading and writing help you understand structure, but speaking helps you build flow. It's a living skill, one that improves only through living practice. Every conversation, even short ones, pushes you forward in ways that silent study never could. It's also important to realize that mistakes are not a sign of failure, they're signs of progress. Each error highlights a gap in your understanding, a small area where your brain needs more clarity. Without mistakes, you'd never know what to improve. In fact, the people who make the most mistakes in conversation often become fluent the fastest because they're constantly getting feedback. Every wrong word spoken brings them one step closer to saying it right next time. Another advantage of speaking early is that it helps you remember vocabulary and grammar more effectively. When you use a new word in conversation, you connect it with an emotion or a personal experience. That emotional connection helps your memory retain the word far longer than if you just wrote it in a notebook. The words you use actively become part of your identity, not just information stored in your mind. This is why real communication accelerates memory. It gives meaning to what you learn. Speaking also improves your listening skills. When you engage in real dialogue, you train your ears to catch pronunciation, rhythm, and nuance. You start recognizing patterns you might miss in passive listening. You begin to understand not just what people say, but how they say it. This two-way interaction makes you more adaptable in real-life situations where English isn't always clear or predictable. It's through active participation that comprehension becomes instinctive. The habit of speaking regularly builds emotional strength too. You become comfortable with discomfort. You stop seeing mistakes as embarrassment and start seeing them as proof of effort. You begin to trust yourself more. That sense of self-assurance doesn't just help your English. It transforms your attitude toward learning anything new. The moment you stop waiting to be perfect, you start progressing faster than you ever imagined possible. Every conversation you have in English, no matter how small, is a victory. Each time you express a thought, you reinforce the belief that you can communicate, that you belong in this language. The act of speaking turns English from something you study into something you live. When you stop chasing flawless speech and start chasing real connection, your confidence grows, your learning accelerates, and your fluency begins to feel inevitable. When we look at how children learn their first language, it's fascinating to realize that they never study grammar books, memorize vocabulary lists, or worry about sentence structure. They learn by listening, imitating, and repeating. They make countless mistakes, but no one criticizes them for it. Instead, people respond, correct naturally, and keep the conversation going. That's how they learn. This natural process is one of curiosity, repetition, and fearlessness. To learn English fast, adopting the mindset of a child is one of the most powerful things you can do. Children are fearless learners. They don't hold back because they're afraid of sounding wrong. They speak with confidence even when they don't know all the words. They're focused on expressing themselves, not on avoiding errors. This attitude allows them to improve quickly because every mistake becomes an opportunity to learn something new. Adults, on the other hand, often let fear get in the way. They hesitate, overthink, and end up saying nothing. But language only grows when it's used, not when it's analyzed endlessly in silence. A child doesn't worry about being grammatically correct. They care about being understood. That's the essence of communication. When you focus too much on correctness, you block your natural ability to speak freely. You start constructing sentences in your mind instead of letting them flow. But when you focus on meaning, on getting your message across, your fluency starts to develop naturally. Mistakes will still happen, but they'll become smaller over time as your brain adjusts through real use. Listening is another powerful part of how children learn. They listen before they speak, and they listen a lot. Their brains absorb patterns, tones, and rhythm without conscious effort. They hear how words connect and how emotion changes meaning. You can do the same with English. Immerse yourself in the sounds of the language through music, movies, podcasts, or conversations. Don't just listen for words, listen for feeling, speed, and expression. The more you hear it, the more naturally your brain will begin to imitate it. Children also repeat constantly. They hear a phrase, try it, get it wrong, and try again. This cycle of repetition is essential for building memory and confidence. Adults often get bored repeating, but repetition is how fluency is formed. When you repeat sentences out loud, your mouth and tongue learn to move in new ways. You begin to build what linguists call muscle memory for the language. Over time, speaking English starts to feel more automatic, less forced, and more natural, just like when a child learns to talk. Another key element of childlike learning is curiosity. Children ask questions all the time because they want to understand how the world works. They're not embarrassed to ask why again and again. As an adult learner, you need that same level of curiosity. When you encounter a new word or phrase, don't just memorize it. Explore it. Look for how it's used, what it means in different contexts, and how people react when it's spoken. Curiosity makes learning enjoyable and keeps your motivation alive. Children don't study in isolation. They learn through play and interaction. They test what they know by using it with others. They get immediate feedback and adjust naturally. You can recreate this environment by engaging in real conversations, joining language exchange groups, or practicing online with others. Treat communication as play, not performance. When you make it fun, your brain relaxes and learning becomes faster and more enjoyable. Patience is another trait we can borrow from children. They don't expect to master language overnight. They babble, mispronounce, and make the same mistakes for months, sometimes years. But they never give up. They know that speaking is part of living, so they keep trying. Adults often lose patience too quickly. They expect quick results and feel discouraged when progress seems slow. But language acquisition takes time, and patience, paired with consistent effort, leads to unstoppable growth. Children are also immersed in emotion when they learn. Their language connects with experiences, joy, excitement, frustration, discovery. They remember words that matter to them. Adults can do the same by learning English through things they love. If you enjoy sports, learn English through sports articles. If you love movies, learn through film dialogues. Emotional connection turns learning into something personal. And when it's personal, it's powerful. The childlike approach to learning isn't about acting childish. It's about freeing yourself from self-judgment and fear. It's about trusting that mistakes are not setbacks, but stepping stones. It's about being patient, curious, playful, and brave. When you allow yourself to learn like a child, you rediscover the natural way language was meant to be learned. Through connection, repetition, and genuine curiosity. Perfection is one of the biggest illusions that hold language learners back. Many people believe that in order to speak English well, they must first reach a flawless level of grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary. They wait for the perfect moment to start speaking, for the perfect words to appear, for the perfect sentence to form in their minds. But that moment never comes. Perfection is not the goal of learning a language. Progress is. The people who learn English fast are the ones who focus on improving a little every day instead of trying to sound perfect from the beginning. Progress means taking small, consistent steps toward fluency, even when those steps feel messy. Every mistake you make is proof that you're learning. Every new word you try to use, every sentence you build, every conversation you attempt is a sign of growth. When you value progress over perfection, you free yourself from the fear of judgment. You start to see mistakes not as failures, but as milestones, visible marks of your improvement. The goal isn't to avoid mistakes, but to collect them, because each one teaches you something that theory alone never could. Perfection creates pressure, and pressure blocks creativity. When your mind is focused on avoiding errors, you stop thinking freely. You become self-conscious and hesitant, afraid of sounding wrong. But communication isn't about being flawless. It's about connection. People won't remember your grammar mistakes. They'll remember your message, your energy, and your courage to speak. Progress happens when you allow yourself to express ideas, even imperfectly, because clarity of thought always matters more than grammatical precision. The truth is, no one ever reaches complete perfection in a language. Even native speakers make grammatical slips, forget words, and mispronounce things. The difference is, they don't stop communicating when that happens. They keep going, and so should you. If you hold yourself to a higher standard than even native speakers, you'll never feel satisfied. But if you shift your focus to progress, to learning something new every single day, you'll see improvement faster than you imagined possible. Progress builds momentum. Each small victory adds confidence and excitement to continue. When you notice that you can understand a podcast better than last week, or that you used a new word correctly in a conversation, it fuels your motivation. That motivation keeps you consistent, and consistency is what produces results. You don't need giant leaps of improvement. Steady, small steps will take you much farther. A few minutes of practice every day compounds into powerful progress over time. Focusing on progress also transforms the way you experience failure. Instead of seeing a difficult conversation as embarrassing, you start seeing it as a training session. You stop running from challenges and begin seeking them. You view each uncomfortable situation as an opportunity to grow. This shift in mindset turns frustration into fuel. The things that once made you nervous, talking to a stranger, giving a short presentation, joining an English group, become chances to prove how far you've come. When you stop chasing perfection, you start enjoying the process. Learning becomes lighter, more playful, and more natural. You find joy in small achievements. Understanding a joke in a movie, reading a paragraph without translation, writing your thoughts freely in English. You begin to appreciate the journey instead of obsessing over the destination. The pressure to be perfect disappears, replaced by pride in your progress. That emotional shift keeps you motivated for the long term. Progress over perfection also teaches you patience. It reminds you that fluency is not built overnight. It's built through repetition, mistakes, correction, and persistence. Each day of effort counts, even when results aren't immediately visible. Language learning is like growing a tree. You water it every day, even before you see it sprout. The results appear quietly, gradually, and then suddenly you realize how much you've grown without even noticing. Celebrating small wins is part of the progress mindset. When you acknowledge every step, finishing a book, learning a new phrase, having your first full conversation, you reinforce positive habits. This recognition creates emotional rewards that keep you consistent. Too many learners ignore their progress because they only see how far they still have to go. But noticing what you've achieved builds confidence and makes you hungry for more improvement. Progress is powerful because it's honest. It accepts imperfection while striving for growth. It allows you to learn naturally, to speak without fear, to make mistakes boldly, and to see every challenge as a step forward. When you measure your journey, not by how perfect you sound, but by how much you've improved, you create a mindset that guarantees continuous learning. Progress is movement, and movement, no matter how small, always leads to transformation. Learning English fast doesn't come from sudden bursts of effort. It comes from steady, daily action. Many people start strong for a few days or weeks, spending hours studying, only to burn out and stop completely. They treat learning like a sprint when in reality, it's a marathon. The learners who progress the fastest are not necessarily the smartest or the most talented. They're the ones who show up every day, no matter how small the step. Daily action builds habits, and habits build fluency. Consistency is more powerful than intensity. You can study for 3 hours once a week and forget most of what you learned by the next session, or you can study for 20 minutes every day and see lasting improvement. The brain learns better with regular exposure. Language is a living thing, and it needs to be fed daily. When you touch the language every day, through listening, reading, speaking, or writing, you keep it alive in your mind. Even short daily practice sessions can create powerful results over time. Daily action doesn't have to mean studying textbooks or memorizing lists. It can be as simple as listening to an English podcast on your commute, reading a short article online, or writing a short journal entry in English before bed. What matters is consistency, not perfection. The goal is to keep English in your life every single day until it becomes a habit as natural as brushing your teeth or checking your phone. When learning becomes part of your routine, progress happens almost effortlessly. Taking daily action also helps you overcome procrastination. When you commit to small, regular tasks, your brain stops seeing English as something heavy or overwhelming. You no longer feel that learning requires hours of focus or huge motivation. You start seeing it as something manageable, something you can do even on your busiest days. This sense of ease keeps you moving forward. Over time, the small daily steps you take accumulate into massive improvement. The power of daily action lies in repetition. The more often you engage with the language, the more familiar it becomes. Words you once struggled to remember start appearing naturally in your thoughts. Grammar rules you used to study begin to make sense intuitively. The brain loves patterns, and daily contact helps it recognize and store those patterns. Every repetition strengthens memory and brings you one step closer to fluency. When you practice daily, you also train your discipline. There will be days when you don't feel motivated, when you're tired, busy, or distracted. But discipline means doing it anyway. Motivation starts the journey, but discipline keeps it alive. Even a small effort on difficult days counts because it builds resilience. You prove to yourself that learning English isn't something you do only when it's convenient. It's something you do because it matters. Daily action also helps you stay emotionally connected to your goal. Each day that you practice, you remind yourself why you started. You feel the progress, however small, and that gives you momentum. You begin to associate English with growth, confidence, and purpose. This emotional link keeps you inspired. Without daily contact, it's easy to lose touch with your motivation, but consistent practice keeps the fire burning. Regular practice also sharpens your awareness. When you use English daily, you start noticing patterns everywhere, in movies, conversations, social media, and songs. Your brain stays tuned in, always alert and learning subconsciously. Even when you're not studying intentionally, your mind is processing information and improving in the background. This kind of continuous learning only happens when English becomes a part of your everyday environment. Taking daily action helps you move from passive understanding to active ability. Reading and listening build input, but using the language every day, speaking, writing, thinking, builds output. The more you practice expressing yourself, the more fluent and confident you become. Small daily interactions, like sending a message in English or thinking out loud, are what turn knowledge into communication. Each repetition makes your responses faster and more natural. Over time, these daily actions build momentum that cannot be stopped. The first few weeks may feel slow, but soon you'll begin to notice real changes. Clearer understanding, easier expression, deeper confidence. The key is not intensity, but persistence. Doing something small every single day keeps your progress alive and growing. When you make English a daily habit, you create unstoppable forward motion that leads to mastery.